So there I was, Jake Martinez, 21 years old and approximately 3 feet shorter than everything else in my advanced xenobiology class. And when I say everything, I mean literally everything. The desks were built for beings the size of small buildings, the doorways could accommodate a semi-truck, and the water fountains required a stepladder that I'm pretty sure was originally designed for toddler alien species. Welcome to Galactic University, where humanity had somehow talked its way into the most prestigious educational institution in the known galaxy, despite the fact that we were what the admissions committee politely termed a developing species. What they really meant was, those weird little mammals who haven't figured out faster than light travel but somehow convinced us they deserved to be here anyway. The exchange program brochure had made it sound so appealing. Experience the wonders of galactic diversity, it said. Expand your horizons, it promised. What it failed to mention was that I'd be expanding my horizons while sitting next to beings who could probably use me as a toothpick. Take my study partners, for example, and I use the term study partners loosely, since they seemed more interested in studying how to dismember me than our assigned reading on comparative evolutionary biology. There was Vex, a 7-foot-tall reptilian nightmare from the Drakmor system. Picture a crocodile that learned to walk upright and developed a serious attitude problem. His scales were the color of old blood, his teeth were approximately the size of kitchen knives, and he had this charming habit of flexing his claws whenever he looked at me. Which was often. Very often. Then we had Thrax, who represented the chitinous collective and looked like someone had crossbred a praying mantis with a tank. His forearms ended in scythe-like appendages that could probably cut through steel, and his compound eyes tracked my every movement like I was a particularly interesting insect he was considering for lunch. The clicking sounds he made when he was thinking were either a sign of deep concentration or him calculating how many pieces he could cut me into. Honestly, 50-50 odds. And finally, there was Kala from the Crystal Dominion. At first glance, she seemed the most harmless of the three, being roughly humanoid and composed of what looked like living gemstones. Beautiful, really. Right up until you realized that those crystals were harder than diamond and she could manipulate them at will. Plus, she had psychic abilities that let her read surface thoughts, which meant she probably knew exactly how terrified I should have been of her. Here's the thing, though, and this might be a character flaw. I wasn't terrified. I was fascinated. While other students gave our little group a wide berth in the hallways, I was busy wondering about the evolutionary advantages of Vex's scale patterns, and whether Thrax's carapace molted seasonally. Kala's crystalline structure raised questions about silicon-based life forms that kept me awake at night, and not in the "oh god, they're going to eat me" way, but in the "this is absolutely incredible" way. The three of them had clearly formed some sort of alliance, probably bonding over their shared status as apex predators from their respective homeworlds. They sat together, moved together, and seemed to communicate through a series of intimidating gestures that roughly translated to, "Look at those pathetic lesser species trembling before us." The problem was, I wasn't trembling, I was taking notes. "Fascinating dermal adaptation," I'd mumbled during our first class, watching Vex's scales shift color slightly in response to the lecture hall's temperature. Is that a thermoregulatory response, or more of a camouflage mechanism? Vex had turned those predatory yellow eyes on me with what I now realized was probably supposed to be a death glare. Instead, I'd smiled and offered him half of my sandwich. Yeah, I was definitely going to have an interesting semester. By week 2, it became clear that my 3 new friends had decided I needed a proper education in terror. Not the kind you get from textbooks, mind you, but the kind that typically ends with someone getting eaten. Their campaigns started small. Vex began each class by stretching languidly, making sure his razor-sharp claws caught the light just right. The sound of keratins scraping against the metal desk was probably supposed to send chills down my spine. Instead, I found myself wondering about the maintenance routine required for weapons that impressive. Did he file them? Polish them? Was there some sort of Drakmor equivalent of a manicure? "That's incredible extension range," I commented one morning, pulling out my tablet to take notes. "The joint flexibility required for that kind of articulation must be remarkable. Do you mind if I ask about your digit structure?" Vex froze mid-stretch, those yellow eyes narrowing to slits. He held the pose for what felt like an eternity, muscles coiled like springs, clearly expecting me to wet myself or flee or both. I waited politely for his answer. Thrax escalated things the next day. He began incorporating what I can only describe as aggressive chittering into his repertoire, accompanied by rapid movements of his scythe arms that painted deadly patterns in the air. The other students in our row had quietly relocated to the far side of the lecture hall, leaving us in a little bubble of empty seats. "Oh, wow," I said, genuinely impressed. "Is that a territorial display or a hunting ritual? The precision of those movements suggests serious muscle memory. How long did it take to develop that kind of coordination?" The chittering stopped abruptly. Thrax's compound eyes fixed on me with what I'm sure was supposed to be menacing intensity. Those scythe arms twitched once, twice, then slowly folded against his carapace. I smiled encouragingly and offered him some of my trail mix. Kala took a more psychological approach. Her crystalline form would suddenly flare with harsh, angular light whenever I got close, and I could feel the subtle pressure of her psychic abilities probing at the edges of my thoughts. It was like having someone very politely knock on the door of your brain. Except the someone was made of living diamonds, and could probably scramble your gray matter if they felt like it. "That's fascinating," I said after her third attempt to telepathically intimidate me. "I've read about psychic resonance in silicon-based life forms, but experiencing it firsthand is incredible. Is it more like electromagnetic radiation, or are we talking about something that operates outside normal physics entirely?" Her crystalline features actually shifted into what might have been confusion. The psychic pressure vanished completely. By the end of week 3, I'd become something of a spectacle. Other students would arrive early just to watch the daily intimidation show, placing what I later learned were actual bets on whether I'd finally crack and run screaming from the room. The Galanoid twins from the Slime Confederation had apparently put 50 credits on me lasting until midterms. A group of energy beings from the Plasma Collective were betting I wouldn't make it through the next lecture. The smart money, according to a helpful tentacled observatory student, was on me having some sort of spectacular mental breakdown by Friday. Nobody, and I mean nobody, was betting on me actually being okay with all this. Which brings us to Thursday morning, when Vex, Thrax, and Kala apparently decided to coordinate their efforts. I walked into class to find all 3 of them arranged in what was unmistakably a hunting formation. Vex had positioned himself to block my usual exit route. Thrax was clicking rhythmically while his scythe arms traced hypnotic patterns, and Kala's entire form blazed with cold, threatening light, while psychic pressure built in the air like an oncoming thunderstorm. The lecture hall had gone dead silent. Even Professor Glickner, our 3-headed cephalopod instructor, had paused mid-sentence to watch the show. I looked at my 3 terrifying classmates, took in their carefully orchestrated display of lethal intent, and felt something I hadn't experienced since arriving at Galactic University. Homesickness. "You know what?" I said, settling into my seat with a sigh. "This reminds me of family dinners back home." The silence that followed my comment was so complete I could hear the ventilation system humming 3 floors up. Every eye, compound eye, optical sensor, and psychic perception organ in the room was focused on our little corner of academic drama. Vex's scales had gone completely rigid. Thrax's chittering had stopped so abruptly it was like someone had hit a pause button. Kala's crystalline glow flickered uncertainly, her psychic pressure wavering like a radio trying to find the right frequency. "Family dinners," I continued, oblivious to the fact that I'd apparently broken several of the galaxy's most feared predators with a single sentence, "are always tense at first. Everyone posturing, trying to establish dominance, showing off their best intimidating faces." I gestured vaguely at the 3 of them. "But then someone breaks the ice, usually with food, and suddenly everyone's just family." Professor Glicknor's 3 heads were swiveling between me and my classmates like he was watching the galaxy's slowest tennis match. "Speaking of which," I said, pulling out my communication device, "I should probably call my mom. She's been worried about me making friends up here." I looked directly at the terrifying trio. "You guys seem cool. Want to come over for dinner tomorrow night?" I was thinking of making my grandmother's lasagna recipe. Fair warning though, it's got enough garlic to kill a vampire, assuming vampires exist in space. Do they? I should probably research that. The betting pool exploded into frantic whispered conferences. Credits were changing hands faster than the university's quantum calculators could process. Apparently, nobody had put money on human invites apex predators over for Italian food. Vex was the first to find his voice, though it came out as more of a strangled hiss. "You invite us to feed?" "Well, yeah," I said, genuinely confused by his tone. "That's what dinner is. We sit around, eat food, talk about our day, complain about professors, present company excluded, Professor Glicknor, argue about sports we've never heard of. Standard stuff." Thrax's compound eyes were practically vibrating. "This is challenge ritual? Combat preparation?" "No, this is Thursday night, though I guess if you want to bring dessert, we could call it a potluck. Do your species do desserts? I'm genuinely curious about galactic sugar alternatives. Kala's psychic probe was back, but gentler this time, like she was trying to figure out if I was having some sort of neurological episode. Her crystalline features kept shifting through what I was learning to recognize as confusion patterns. Human, Jake, she said carefully, her voice like wind chimes in a hurricane. You comprehend what we are, yes? What we represent? Sure, I shrugged. You're my classmates. Also probably the most biologically fascinating individuals I've ever met. Which is saying something considering my Uncle Bob once dated a woman who turned out to be 3 raccoons in a trench coat. Long story. The 3 of them exchanged looks. Well, Vex and Thrax exchanged looks. Kala did whatever the crystalline equivalent of meaningful eye contact was. We are apex predators, Vex said slowly, like he was explaining basic physics to a particularly dense child. From our respective worlds. We hunt. We kill. We dominate. Okay, I said, nodding thoughtfully. Cool. What does that have to do with dinner? Before any of them could answer, the classroom door burst open and my roommate Danny Chen practically tumbled through, loaded down with what appeared to be half the contents of the university commissary. Jake, he called out, completely ignoring the fact that he'd just interrupted the galaxy's most awkward standoff. I got those ingredients you wanted. The stuff for your grandma's lasagna, plus, I found actual Earth-style tomatoes at the import shop. Cost me a week's allowance, but totally worth it for proper marinara sauce. Denny finally looked up from his grocery bags and noticed our audience. His gaze swept over Vex's reptilian bulk, Thrax's weaponized insectoid form, and Kala's crystalline radiance. Then he looked at the betting pools, the terrified faces of our classmates, and Professor Glicknor's 3 expressions of academic fascination mixed with concern for student safety. "Oh hey," Danny said brightly, setting down his bags and extending a hand toward the 3 aliens. "You must be Jake's new study group. I'm Danny, nice to meet you." Nobody moved. "They're coming to dinner tomorrow," I explained helpfully. "I was just telling them about Grandma's lasagna." Danny's face lit up. "Oh, awesome. Fair warning, though, Jake's cooking tends to be pretty intense. Last time he made dinner for the International Student Union, half the attendees asked for the recipe, and the other half asked for medical attention. In a good way, though." Vex, Thrax, and Kala were staring at Danny like he'd just announced his intention to juggle black holes. "You?" Thrax clicked uncertainly. "You are not afraid?" Danny looked genuinely puzzled. "Of what? Jake's cooking isn't that bad? I mean, okay, his spice tolerance is probably classified as a war crime by some galactic conventions, but it's really good once you adjust to the fact that your mouth might catch fire." "We are apex predators," Kala tried again, her crystalline form pulsing with what I was starting to recognize as frustrated confusion. "Cool," Danny said. "What's your major?" I grinned and started packing up my notes. Tomorrow night was going to be interesting. Friday afternoon arrived with the kind of cosmic irony that probably had ancient gods somewhere placing their own bets. There I was in our dorm kitchen, humming off-key earth pop music while browning ground beef, completely unaware that I was about to accidentally traumatize 3 of the galaxy's most feared species with the casual brutality of human food preparation. Denny had set up his tablet to video call his little sister back on Earth, propping it against the spice rack where she could watch us cook. 8-year-old Mia Chen was practically bouncing in her chair, excited to see Jake's scary alien friends. "Are they really scary, Jake?" she asked, her gap-toothed grin filling the screen. "Nah," I said, stirring the meat with one hand while crushing garlic with the other. "They're just really tall, and have natural weapons, and could probably bench press a small car. But they seem nice." Our 3 guests had arrived exactly on time, which, in hindsight, should have been my first clue that they were treating this like a military operation. They'd positioned themselves near the exit, maintained perfect sightlines to all entrances, and were currently watching me cook with the kind of focused attention usually reserved for defusing bombs. Vex's nostrils flared as the smell of browning meat filled the air. His pupils dilated to thin slits, and I caught him unconsciously licking his lips with that forked tongue. "Human Jake," he said carefully. "This scent. It triggers responses." "Oh good," I said cheerfully, adding onions to the pan. "That means the Maillard reaction's working properly. Chemistry in action. Danny, can you grab the wine? The recipe calls for a full cup in the sauce, plus whatever we want to drink." Denny emerged from our micro-pantry with a bottle of red wine that had cost more than our textbooks. "Earth vintage," he announced proudly. "Been saving it for a special occasion." Thrax's compound eyes tracked the bottle like a targeting system. "Fermented plant matter. You consume Poison? For pleasure? Word. Well, technically it's poison, Danny agreed, popping the cork with practiced ease. But it's really good poison. Plus, alcohol is basically humanity's solution to social anxiety. Want some? Before Thrax could answer, I started explaining the lasagna construction process to Mia, who was taking notes, like this was the most important homework assignment in the universe. So first, you layer the meat sauce, I said, spreading the aromatic mixture across the bottom of the baking dish. Then you add the ricotta mixture, which is basically cheese, eggs, and herbs beaten into submission. Then the noodles, which we boiled until they achieved optimal flexibility. Kala's crystalline form suddenly flared bright enough to cast shadows. You speak of violence toward food, submission, beating. This is normal? Oh yeah, Danny said, taking a sip of wine and offering the bottle around. Jake's always been weirdly aggressive about cooking. You should hear him talk about tenderizing meat. I paused in my layering process, suddenly aware that my 3 guests were staring at me with expressions I couldn't quite read. Is everything okay? You guys seem tense. Vex's voice came out as barely more than a growl. You spoke of hunting methods earlier. Persistence predation. Oh right, I said, brightening as I continued building the lasagna. Yeah, that's humanity's whole thing. We're basically the galaxy's most terrifying marathon runners. Our ancestors would literally chase prey animals until they collapsed from exhaustion. Could take days sometimes. I started grating fresh Parmesan, the sharp scraping sound somehow ominous in the sudden silence. Days, Thrax repeated slowly. Nope. Never letting them rest, never letting them escape. Just following. Always following, until their hearts gave out. I added the cheese with flourish. Pretty metal, right? Though these days, we mostly use it for ultramarathons and really awkward relationships. Danny snorted into his wine. Remember when you explained persistence hunting to Professor Martinez in Anthro 101? She looked like she was going to call campus security. That's because I used my ex-girlfriend as an example, I protested, sliding the assembled lasagna into the oven, which, in retrospect, probably sent the wrong message about human courtship rituals. Mia giggled from the tablet screen. Jake's weird about food, but he makes really good cookies. Are your alien friends going to like people food? Kala leaned closer to the screen, her crystalline features shifting with curiosity. Small human, she said carefully, are you not concerned that we might harm your friend? Mia considered this with the serious gravity that only 8-year-olds can muster. Nah, Jake's really good at making friends. Plus, Mommy says anyone who comes to dinner is family, and you don't hurt family. Your mother sounds wise, Vex said, something unreadable in his voice. She is, Mia agreed. She also says Jake could probably make friends with a black hole if he brought enough snacks. While the lasagna baked, I started preparing garlic bread, which involved what was apparently another traumatizing display of human food brutality. I took a perfectly innocent loaf of Italian bread and began sawing it into thick slices with a serrated knife, each cut accompanied by Danny's running commentary on human culinary history. Reed's actually one of humanity's oldest technologies, he explained, settling into professor mode while refilling wine glasses. We basically figured out how to torture grain into submission. Add some fungus to make it bubble, then blast it with heat until it transforms into something completely different. We're really good at transforming things, I added, slathering butter and minced garlic onto each slice. It's kind of our thing. Take something in its natural state, apply various forms of controlled violence, and turn it into something better. Thrax's chittering had taken on a nervous quality. This is how you approach all problems? Pretty much, Danny and I said in unison. I caught Vex, Thrax, and Kala exchanging another one of those meaningful looks, the kind that probably involved a lot of rapid interspecies communication about threat assessment and survival strategies. Hey, I said, suddenly self-conscious. Are you guys okay? You seem kind of freaked out. Is it the garlic? I know some species have issues with sulfur compounds. Kala's psychic presence brushed against my mind again, gentler this time, almost tentative. Human Jake, she said carefully. We are beginning to understand that we may have misunderstood your species. Oh good, I said, sliding the garlic bread into the oven alongside the lasagna. What did you think we were? The 3 of them looked at each other again, then back at me. Prey, Vex said simply. Denny nearly choked on his wine. Prey? Us? Have you met humans? The oven timer chose that exact moment to announce that dinner was ready, filling our small dorm kitchen with the kind of aromatic symphony that makes Italian grandmothers weep with pride. I pulled out the lasagna, golden and bubbling, followed by the garlic bread that had achieved that perfect balance between crispy and buttery that probably violated several laws of physics. "Dinner is served," I announced, carrying the dishes to our tiny dining table that Danny had somehow managed to expand with engineering textbooks and a tablecloth from home. Our three guests approached the table like they were entering a minefield. Vex's nostrils were working overtime, his predatory instincts clearly at war with whatever social protocols his species used for not immediately devouring everything in sight. Thrax had gone completely still except for the occasional nervous click, and Kala's crystalline form was cycling through colors I was pretty sure weren't in any standard emotional spectrum. "So," Danny said, cutting into the lasagna with the casual efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "When you guys said you thought we were prey, what exactly gave you that impression?" Mia was still on the tablet, propped up so she could watch dinner like it was her favorite TV show. "Are you going to tell them about Uncle Rick and the bear?" she asked helpfully. "Oh God, not the bear story," Danny groaned. "What bear story?" Kala asked, accepting a plate of lasagna like it might explode. "It's not that interesting," I said, serving portions that were probably large enough to feed a small village. "My uncle just had a disagreement with a black bear over a picnic basket. Standard human-wildlife interaction stuff." Vex's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "Standard?" "Yeah, you know. Territorial dispute. The bear thought it owned the campsite. Uncle Rick thought he had prior claim. They worked it out." "Worked it out how?" Thrax asked, his compound eyes fixed on me with laser focus. Danny snorted. "Rick punched it in the nose and told it to find its own sandwiches." The silence that followed was broken only by Mia's giggling from the tablet and the sound of 3 apex predators slowly processing what they'd just heard. "Your uncle," Kala said carefully, "engaged in physical combat with a planetary-class predator over food resources." "Well, when you put it like that, it sounds way more dramatic than it was," I said, taking a bite of lasagna. "It was really more of a disagreement about property rights. Plus, black bears aren't that dangerous if you know what you're doing. It's the grizzlies you have to watch out for." "There are bigger bears." Vex's voice had climbed about an octave. "Oh yeah," Danny said conversationally. "Grizzlies can weigh up to 800 pounds and run 35 miles per hour, but that's nothing compared to polar bears. Those things are basically 4-legged murder machines with a PhD in creative violence." Thrax set down his fork with a click that sounded suspiciously like a weapon being readied. "And humans coexist with these creatures?" "Sure," I shrugged. "Mostly we just avoid them, though some people hunt them for sport." "Sport," Kala repeated, like she was testing out a foreign concept. "Yeah, for fun. Though personally I think that's kind of unfair. Bears don't have opposable thumbs or projectile weapons, so it's not really a fair fight." Mia piped up from the screen. "Tell him about when Daddy climbed Mount Everest." "Oh right," I said, warming to the subject. "Danny's dad climbs mountains for fun, you know, those giant rock formations that stick up into the stratosphere where there's no oxygen and everything wants to kill you." Vex had gone completely still, his reptilian features locked in what I was learning to recognize as the alien equivalent of a system error. "For recreation?" "Best stress relief ever, according to him," Danny confirmed. "Nothing puts your problems in perspective quite like dangling from a cliff face in a blizzard while trying not to fall to your death." Thrax's chittering had taken on a distinctly strained quality. "You willingly place yourselves in mortal peril, for emotional regulation." "Well, yeah," I said, confused by his tone. "Doesn't everyone? What do your species do for fun?" The three of them exchanged looks that could have powered a small starship. "We hunt lesser species for sustenance," Vex said slowly. "We engage in ritual combat to establish dominance hierarchies," Thrax added. "We contemplate the harmonic resonance of crystalline structures," Kala finished. Denny and I considered this information while chewing thoughtfully. "That sounds really relaxing," I said finally. "But what do you do when you want to get your adrenaline up? You know, feel really alive?" "Adrenaline?" Kala's psychic presence was practically vibrating with confusion. "Yeah, you know, that fight-or-flight response. The hormone rush you get when you're in danger. Humans are basically addicted to it. It's why we invented extreme sports." "Extreme sports?" Thrax repeated. "Oh man, where do I start?" Danny said, getting that look he got when he was about to launch into one of his enthusiastic explanations. "There's skydiving, where you jump out of perfectly good aircraft thousands of feet in the air. Bungee jumping, where you leap off bridges with nothing but an elastic cord keeping you from becoming street pizza. Whitewater rafting, where you navigate Class 5 rapids in a tiny boat while nature tries to drown you." Base jumping, I added helpfully, rock climbing without ropes, motorcycle racing. Free diving, where you see how long you can hold your breath underwater while swimming with sharks. Sharks, Vex said faintly. Aquatic apex predators, Danny explained. 30-foot-long fish with rows of serrated teeth and absolutely no sense of humor. Some humans swim with them voluntarily. Others cage dive, which is where you get lowered into shark-infested waters in a metal box and hope the sharks can't figure out how to open it. Kala's crystalline form had gone completely transparent, which I was pretty sure was the silicon-based equivalent of turning pale. You actively seek out situations where you might be consumed by predators, for entertainment. Well, when you put it like that, it sounds kind of crazy, I admitted. But the rush is incredible. Nothing makes you feel more alive than almost dying. Mia giggled from the screen. Jake's weird. Last summer he went cliff diving and Mommy grounded him for a week. To be fair, I said defensively, I did calculate the trajectory and water depth beforehand. It was perfectly safe. Perfectly safe, Thrax muttered. And I was pretty sure he wasn't talking to us anymore, but rather having some kind of existential crisis in real time. The thing is, Danny continued, apparently oblivious to the fact that our guests looked like they were questioning everything they'd ever believed about the universe. Humans get bored really easily. We need challenges. We need problems to solve. Obstacles to overcome, mountains to climb, literally in some cases. We're persistence predators, remember? I added, refilling wine glasses because our guests looked like they needed it. That's not just about hunting, it's about everything. We see something impossible and think, challenge accepted. We see something that says do not attempt and immediately start planning how to attempt it bigger and better than anyone else. Vex was staring at his lasagna like it held the secrets of the universe. This meal, he said slowly, is constructed from conquered plant matter, processed animal proteins, and fermented liquid. Yeah, that's a really intense way to describe Italian food, but technically accurate, I said. You heated it with controlled fire until it transformed into something entirely new. That's also technically accurate. Are you feeling okay? Kala's psychic presence was doing something I'd never felt before, like she was rapidly shuffling through a massive database trying to recategorize everything. Human Jake, she said carefully. How many humans are there? On Earth? About 8 billion, give or take. 8 billion, she repeated. Yeah, we're kind of everywhere, why? Thrax made a sound that might have been chittering, or might have been the insectoid equivalent of hysterical laughter. 8 billion persistence predators who climb mountains for recreation, and swim with aquatic apex predators for entertainment. And punch bears over sandwich disputes, Danny added helpfully. Don't forget the part where we figured out how to harness controlled explosions for transportation, I said, because apparently I was committed to breaking their worldview completely. Cars, planes, rockets. Humans basically looked at the most dangerous chemical reactions in the universe and thought, bet we could ride that. Vex's claws were now gripping the table hard enough to leave gouges in the metal. Your species weaponized combustion for daily transportation. Well, yeah. How else were we supposed to get around? Walking everywhere would take forever, and we're way too impatient for that. Kala's form suddenly blazed with every color in the spectrum, and a few that probably didn't exist outside of theoretical physics. We came here, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, to establish dominance over what we believed were harmless prey animals. Instead, Thrax continued, his chittering now definitely hysterical, we have learned that we are sharing a university with 8 billion individuals who consider mortal peril a recreational activity, and who invite apex predators over for dinner when they want to make friends, Vex finished, looking down at his empty plate like he was seeing it for the first time. Denny and I looked at each other, then at our 3 guests who appeared to be having simultaneous nervous breakdowns. So, I said carefully, does this mean you guys want to stay for dessert? I made tiramisu. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in advanced xenobiology, watching Professor Glicknor attempt to explain pack hunting dynamics to a classroom that now included what the university gossip network had dubbed the Human Dinner Party Incident Survivors. The betting pools had evolved considerably since that first dinner. What started as, will the human survive contact with apex predators, had transformed into a complex wagering system covering everything from how many species will Jake accidentally traumatize this week, to what's the over-under on galactic diplomatic incidents caused by aggressive human friendliness. The Gelanoid twins had made a killing betting on Human Adopts Apex Predators as study group, while the Plasma Collective was still trying to understand how they'd lost money on inevitable violent confrontation resulting in human consumption. Vex, Thrax, and Kala had undergone what I can only describe as a complete personality restructuring. Where once they'd stalked through the halls like harbingers of doom, they now traveled in a tight formation around me, like the galaxy's most overqualified bodyguards, which was both flattering and completely unnecessary, but try explaining that to 3 former apex predators who'd recently discovered they'd been outclassed by a species that considers jumping out of aircraft a valid weekend activity. "Jake," Vex said, leaning down to whisper in that gravelly voice of his, "the crystalline hegemony students at Table 7 are discussing territorial expansion theories." "Okay," I whispered back, not looking up from my notes on symbiotic relationships in binary star systems. "Are they being loud? Because Professor Glicknor gets cranky when people talk during lectures." "Bell and I are planning to challenge you to academic combat," Thrax clarified, his compound eyes tracking the mentioned table with predatory precision, "for presuming to befriend beings of our caliber." I finally looked up to see a group of what appeared to be living gemstones huddled around Table 7, occasionally glancing in our direction while making gestures that probably looked impressive to other crystalline lifeforms but mostly just reminded me of really aggressive jazz hands. "Academic combat?" I asked. "Is that like a debate tournament? Because I was on the debate team in high school, won regionals 3 years running." Kala's form flared with what I had learned was her version of barely controlled panic. "Human Jake, they do not comprehend what you are. They see only that you have formed alliances with 3 apex predators and assume you must be defeated to establish proper hierarchical dominance." "That's silly," I said, making a note to ask Professor Glicknor about the symbiotic relationship between Regelian moss creatures and their host planets after class. "I didn't form alliances, I just invited you guys over for dinner. Speaking of which, Danny's making his famous chili tonight if you want to come over again. Fair warning, though, he uses Carolina Reapers, so we might want to have the medical bay on standby." The 3 of them exchanged that look again. I'd been seeing variations of it for weeks now, ever since they'd fully processed the implications of what they'd learned at our little dinner party. It was the kind of look that suggested extensive interspecies communication about threat assessment, survival strategies, and possibly therapy referrals. "You continue to treat potential violence as a social inconvenience," Vex observed, not for the first time. "Well, yeah, violence is pretty inconvenient, messy, time-consuming, usually results in paperwork. Much easier to just share food and talk things out." Thrax's chittering had taken on what I recognized as his "humans are terrifying but we're committed to this friendship now" frequency. "The hegemony students approach." Indeed, the crystalline jazz hands delegation was making their way across the lecture hall, with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested they'd watched too many dramatic confrontation videos, and not enough nature documentaries about what happens when you poke persistence predators. Their leader, a particularly sparkly individual whose name I was pretty sure was something like Krextalnathame or possibly Kevin, stopped directly in front of our table, and began pulsing with aggressive geometric patterns. "Human creature," Kevin announced in a voice like breaking glass, "you have exceeded your species-designated social boundaries by claiming partnership with apex-tier organisms. This transgression demands resolution through academic combat." The entire lecture hall had gone silent. Professor Glicknor's 3 heads were swiveling between us and the hegemony students like he was watching the setup for either the most fascinating social experiment in university history or a massacre that would require significant paperwork. I looked at Kevin, then at his backup singers who were all pulsing in synchronized patterns that probably looked really intimidating if you were into interpretive crystalline dance. Then I looked at my 3 friends, who had gone into what I was learning to recognize as protective formation alpha, which apparently involved a lot of barely suppressed violence and strategic positioning for maximum defensive coverage. "Academic combat," I repeated, mostly to make sure I'd heard correctly. "You want to fight me because I made friends." "Academic combat," Kevin confirmed, his crystalline structure brightening with what was either confidence or the geological equivalent of showing off. "A formal challenge to establish proper social hierarchies and determine dominance through intellectual supremacy." "Okay," I said, closing my notebook and giving Kevin my full attention. "What did you have in mind? Debate? Quiz bowl? Collaborative research presentation?" Kevin's geometric patterns faltered slightly. Behind me, I could hear Thrax muttering something in his native tongue that probably translated to "here we go again." "We propose," Kevin said, apparently improvising as he went, "a comprehensive examination of advanced theoretical xenobiology, with particular emphasis on predator-prey relationship dynamics and evolutionary adaptation strategies." "Cool," I said. "When?" The patterns on Kevin's surface had shifted to what I was pretty sure was confusion. When? Yeah. When do you want to do this? I've got galactic history at 3, but I'm free after 4. Oh, but I should probably mention that I've been working on a thesis about convergent evolution in apex predator species across different galactic sectors. Been doing a lot of research with my study group here. I gestured to Vex, Thrax, and Kala, about their respective evolutionary advantages, and how environmental pressures shaped their development into apex organisms. Kevin's brightness dimmed noticeably. You have been studying them? Well, yeah, they're fascinating examples of evolutionary specialization. Vex represents the pinnacle of reptilian predator development, with integrated weapon systems and environmental adaptability that's just incredible. Thrax showcases the absolute peak of arthropod engineering, with natural armor plating and precision instrumentation that would make military contractors weep with envy. And Kala demonstrates the theoretical limits of silicon-based life, with psychic capabilities that challenge our fundamental understanding of consciousness and neural processing. I was getting excited now, the way I always did when I got to talk about stuff that genuinely fascinated me. Plus, they've been helping me understand pack dynamics, territorial behavior, and cooperative hunting strategies from first-hand experience. Did you know that Drakmori actually have complex social hierarchies based on scar patterns? Or that chitinous collective individuals can communicate through subsonic frequency modulation that's completely inaudible to most species? Kevin had gone completely transparent, which in crystalline beings was either extreme stealth mode or the equivalent of fainting while standing up. You have been, he said faintly, interrogating apex predators about their hunting methodologies. Not interrogating, I protested. Discussing, over dinner. They're really great conversationalists once you get them started. Thrax has some fascinating theories about the relationship between environmental toxicity and carapace development, and Vex knows more about thermal regulation in hostile climates than most environmental science textbooks. One of Kevin's backup singers made a sound like a wine glass being dropped in a gravel pit. Another had started cycling through colors that definitely weren't in any normal emotional spectrum. Human Jake, Kala said gently, her psychic presence doing that thing where she tried to share information without actually invading my thoughts. They are experiencing fear responses. I looked at the crystalline hegemony students, then at the rest of the lecture hall, which had filled with the kind of silence that usually preceded either standing ovations or evacuation orders. Fear responses, I repeated. About what? Vex's chuckle sounded like rocks grinding together in an avalanche. Perhaps because you just casually described extracting tactical intelligence from 3 apex predators over Italian food, while treating it as recreational social activity, Thrax added, his chittering taking on distinctly amused overtones. And expressing enthusiasm for the learning experience, Kala finished. I considered this information while Kevin and his crew looked like they were reconsidering every life choice that had led them to this moment. Oh, I said finally. I guess that does sound kind of intense when you put it that way. The betting pools around the lecture hall exploded into frantic activity. Credits were changing hands faster than quantum processors could track, and I caught sight of at least 3 different species frantically updating their risk assessment charts. Kevin managed to pull himself together enough to speak, though his voice sounded like someone gargling broken crystal. We withdraw our challenge. Are you sure? I asked, genuinely disappointed. Because I really was looking forward to discussing convergent evolution patterns with you. The way crystalline life forms adapt to different mineral compositions is absolutely fascinating, and I'd love to hear your perspective on how environmental crystal matrices influence cognitive development. Kevin backed away like I'd just offered to perform surgery on him with a rusty spoon. His entire delegation was now in full retreat, leaving trails of sparkly dust and what I was pretty sure were stress pheromones. So, Danny said, sliding into the seat next to me as the hegemony students fled the lecture hall. I heard you accidentally terrorized another species with aggressive friendliness. Again. It wasn't on purpose, I protested. I was just being polite. Professor Glicknor cleared his 3 throats simultaneously, a sound like an orchestra of chainsaws attempting harmony. Perhaps we should return to today's lecture on symbiotic relationships, he suggested, though his 6 eyes were still tracking the fleeing crystalline students with what looked like academic fascination mixed with concern for his insurance premiums. As the class settled back into normal routine, Vex leaned over to whisper in my ear. Jake, you realize that by now half the species in the galaxy probably consider humans to be the most terrifying predators in known space. I glanced around the lecture hall, noting the way other students gave our table a respectful berth. the nervous energy in the betting pools, and the fact that several species seemed to be taking notes on everything I said. "That's ridiculous," I said. "We're just friendly." "Yes," Kala's voice chimed in my head, warm with what I was learning to recognize as crystalline amusement. "Aggressively friendly persistence predators who befriend apex species for recreational social interaction. Truly, nothing terrifying about that whatsoever." "Exactly," I said, completely missing her sarcasm while pulling out my phone to text Danny about dinner plans. "See? You get it." Thrax's compound eyes glittered with what might have been the arthropod equivalent of affection. "We should probably warn you that there's a growing movement among several species coalitions to establish formal diplomatic protocols for interacting with humans." "Diplomatic protocols?" I looked up from my phone. "For what?" "Surviving contact with your species," Vex explained patiently, "without accidentally triggering your friendship responses." I stared at him. My friendship responses aren't that scary. The three of them looked at each other, then at me, then began what I'd come to recognize as synchronized interspecies laughter. Vex's sounded like a landslide, Thrax's like a percussion section having a seizure, and Kala's like wind chimes in a tornado. "Jake," Danny said, grinning as he pulled up something on his tablet, "you might want to see this." He showed me what appeared to be a university-wide bulletin posted that morning. "Weekly social gathering, Human Cultural Exchange Dinner Series, hosted by Jake Martinez. Attendance voluntary, but recommended for species seeking to understand human social dynamics. Warning: previous attendees report significant worldview restructuring. Medical support available upon request." Below that was a sign-up sheet that already had 43 names from 15 different species. I looked at the screen, then at my three friends who were still laughing, then at the lecture hall full of alien classmates who were watching me with expressions ranging from fascination to terror to something that might have been hopeful curiosity. "Well," I said finally, "I guess I better call my mom and get her lasagna recipe, the real one this time." And that's how I accidentally started the most popular extracurricular activity in Galactic University history. Established humans as the galaxy's most accidentally terrifying friendship ambassadors, and learned that sometimes the best way to make friends is to invite apex predators over for dinner and just see what happens. The universe, it turns out, has a pretty good sense of humor. It just took a while for everyone else to get the joke.